Okay, so I'm going to be doing an example EPQ presentation, which might be useful for you guys in Year 12. You kind of want to see what an EPQ presentation looks like. And so right before we begin, I've got a keyword sheet or a glossary that I'm going to hand out to the audience member here. And that'll be useful in sort of deciphering keywords. Okay, so my title is, to what extent is neurologic music therapy a more effective treatment for the management of Parkinson's disease as opposed to deep brain stimulation and pharmacological treatments? So starting my EPQ. So I actually arrived at neurology after attending a conference at Imperial, and I thought that would be a good idea to research this branch of neurology further, as I actually witnessed Parkinson's brain dissection there, which was interesting. And I also chose to focus on music, as I've been a musician for many years now, but I haven't really considered the physiological effects of music until recently. So I was doing my grade 8 exam, I was preparing for my grade 8 exam, and I noticed like my skin toughening in particular areas. So I was wondering so this is like the outer implications of music, but also like the physiological implications. So that's why I chose music. In terms of the actual project aims, I aim to develop my neurology knowledge throughout this project, because I don't really know much at the start of the project. And also understand the pathophysiology of Parkinson's and how the treatments actually target this, because I thought this would be rather interesting to know. Why did I choose Parkinson's over Alzheimer's? So initially my project focused on Alzheimer's, as I thought it would be interesting to do it, as I actually had conversations with Alzheimer's patients at my care home. But as the drugs that I found interesting to treat Parkinson's, so things like aducanumab, they're actually really new. There's not much research on it to do an EPQ on, so I thought it might be better to change the disease. How did I actually refine my title? So I went from talking about just NMT and pharmacological treatments, and then I added surgical treatments there as well, before narrowing down the surgical treatment to just DBS. What I learned from this is to be open, so in the actual beginning of the EPQ and your research, there might be other things you're interested in, and because in your early stages you can change EPQ as much as you want. And to be specific as well, because rather than focus on surgical treatments, which is just a box, sort of focus on one thing, so that you don't go over the word limit, and also finding a topic that you enjoy. So in terms of my resources that I've used, so these were the main ones, and these were actually all my resources. So I did use some more non-academic resources, as well as some more academic resources as well. So why did I use some over others? So I remember having this neurologic music therapy book, which discussed a lot more about the history of NMT rather than the physiological effects of it, which I was more interested in. So I decided not to use that. And also because of reliability, so there were some PubMed articles that I potentially could have used, but I decided not to, because there were some conflicts of interest, and I'll add some bias to my report. In terms of my note-taking technique, I use mind maps and also written notes, and mind maps are really useful in sort of showing which bits of information were linked to other bits. And my compilation method was to work out research questions. So what are the advantages of pharmacological treatments, what were the disadvantages, and things like that. And on Word, writing a bullet point list, and sort of compiling all the key details. What I learned from this was to be selective. So academic versus non-academic. And what I mean by that is, at the beginning I did used to use a bit more non-academic resources, and because my supervisor recommended me to use more academic resources, I did that. and that helped improve the level of detail I had. And to not actually read everything in the textbooks, so sometimes at the beginning that's what I thought, to just go through the whole book. Or what I realised was just finding the bits that I'm interested in for my EPQ is fine. And also to keep track of information where it's from. So on my mind maps, at the beginning I did write down the references for each bit of information. And when I came back later, that was a lot harder. So that's something I should do from the beginning. So my actual planning. So how did I actually allocate my work? So I worked out what I had to do, worked out how much time I had, and I sort of worked out a timetable from that, and sort of found a slot. What did I learn from this? So I learned time management, sort of organising my time, and ensuring everything is done, and also the importance of contingency time. So especially for my evaluation, I learned that it took a lot more time than you actually think, and to actually factor that extra time at the end to fix things that you haven't fully done yet. And also adaptability. So because of COVID-19, my deadlines were changed and my schedule had to be changed as well. So I guess in that way, I learned to be adaptable. How did I plan my draft report? So I had a really big table, and sort of had advantages of NMT, disadvantages, and sort of compiled all the information onto one side and the other, and had arguments on one side and the other as well, and ranked them between strengths 1 to 5. And what I learned from this is that planning is essential, because this plan was really useful when it came later on to actually writing my report, and setting out criteria for these arguments is useful. So in terms of, because my title is Management of Parkinson's Disease, actually working out criteria for this management is useful in coming to write your evaluation and conclusion. So this is my learning process so far. So the strengths that I've had so far is good adaptability, having good research questions, and an essay plan, as well as using mind maps of my note-taking and being specific in my title. However, I said earlier, next time I would choose academic resources quicker, and read resources in a lot less detail, and include references as well. So now let's actually talk about Parkinson's. So Parkinson's is a neurodegenerative disease of the dopaminergic neurons in the basal ganglia, and it affects something called the direct and indirect pathway, which are different sort of neuronal circuits in the brain that affects your movement, and this leads to trap symptoms. So this is tremor, rigidity, akinesia, and postural instability. And if you don't know what any of these words mean, you might want to check your glossary sheet as well, which might come in use. And in terms of the criteria that sort of devised for Parkinson's is, so the treatment should allow the patient to have independence, a high quality of life, a good life expectancy, and also known as quality of life is a low cost, fewer side effects, and should be available to all. And the treatments I chose, again, were NMT, DBS, and drug therapies. So the strengths of drug therapies were they're cheap for both the patient to actually buy and also for the NHS to manufacture because they can be mass produced. They have potential for development, so they can definitely be researched further, and they're generally quite effective in treating symptoms. So levodopa levodopa ranks quite highly in the UP-RDS scale. And the weaknesses is there are some side effects sometimes. So you can have, especially with levodopa, you can have some dyskinesia sometimes, and with amantadine you can have antiviral resistance. You might also have polypharmacy, where you're having a cocktail of drugs which sort of interact really badly, and you might have low effectiveness over time as your body becomes resistant to it. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about neurologic music therapy. So the strengths of NMT is that it can actually alleviate some motor and non-motor symptoms. as well as insomnia and gait, which is really useful. And also, not only just helps your symptoms, but also improves your mood and also acts as a social experience for these patients. And in terms of weaknesses, NMT is not widely available. There are only around 100 also music therapists on the NHS, and therefore it can be expensive if you want to do it privately. And also there has been some, and this is the main weakness of NMT, is that there's been some conflicting meta-analyses in terms to do with NMT improving symptoms of Parkinson's. So some say that that gait has been improved, while others says it's not. Okay, now I'm going to talk to you about DBS. So DBS does improve motor movement, so it does improve your heart rate to quality of life, and also can have a slightly more personalized procedure where you have personalized stimulation parameters, because each person has sort of different neuronal threshold, like electrical threshold. And in terms of weaknesses, there can be lots of side effects, especially considering this is a surgery. So you can have hemorrhage, which might happen during surgery. You can also have mood fluctuations post-surgery. There's also some ethical issues here as well. So in order to actually have DBS, there's the quite narrow selection criteria, which can be discriminatory. And also, you need to think about capacity, especially as in Parkinson's, you might also have Lewy body dementia, because those two diseases are linked, and there's also an expensive treatment for the NHS. In terms of our findings and conclusions, I concluded that NMT is more effective than DBS and drug therapy. So this is because if you go back to our criteria, NMT is a lot more viable in the long term as opposed to drugs, with fewer side effects, and being rather cheap, especially with group music therapy, which is a type of NMT, and also it being able to treat multiple disorders at once, so not just Parkinson's, but can also help your memory. So in terms of the evidence I found, which further backed up NMT as a treatment, I found a few more meta-analyses, and they showed that gait actually improved, and there were less freezing, which is another symptom of Parkinson's. And I feel like that symptom improvement alone improves autonomy, which is really the main, which is really the main criteria in the management of Parkinson's. And as I said earlier, DBS has a few side effects so DBS has a few side effects that doesn't make it as a viable treatment as it could, and drug therapy is not a long-term solution. So my overall report strengths and weaknesses is, one strength is I used a good referencing system throughout, which is consistent. So I used Harvard referencing, I had a good source evaluation, and according to my supervisor, I had a good flow and writing style. And I also tried to use a lot of evidence from lots of different sources, so it was evidence-based. However, I did go a bit over the word count, and I did use a few non-academic sources, such as Khan Academy, and range of sources. Oh, and also I didn't use quite the range of sources that I wanted to, such as I used a lot from one particular DBS book. So what I learnt and advice. So from the EPQ, I really gained an appreciation of research and what it actually is, and sort of paving the way towards treatment. And also it kind of helped me develop my personal skills, so my time management, my organisation, and sort of my diligence of working towards something over a long period of time. And to some effect, the Dunning-Kruger effect happened here, where there's a sort of line that goes up and down in terms of your confidence. So where I thought, okay, I know Parkinson's now, and then you realise that you really don't, and there's a lot more information out there. And also the EPQ helped me develop my note-taking strategy, sort of the mind maps, and forming the research questions, which might be useful in the future. And And I also say the EPQ really is a commitment. So it really took a large chunk of my lockdown period last year, and it's something to be taken seriously. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Koushikk, for that very insightful presentation into your EPQ. So now I'll ask you some questions about your EPQ. So, my first question is, how specifically did COVID affect your sort of plans for the project? Because you mentioned that it did affect your plans, but how specifically?
Yes, so how specifically? So what happened was the lockdown happened. So I was planning to sort of reduce the amount of work that I'll do towards my EPQ because of school. But because of the lockdown happened and the deadlines got pushed a lot forward, I realised that I had to put in a lot more work to actually meet the EPQ deadline, sort of writing the production log, writing the report, and things like that. So I did have to edit my schedule so that I could do that.
Also, your microphone is sort of buried in your jumper, so I don't know if that affects the sound.
I don't know. I think it should be okay.
Thanks for that. So my next question is, so you concluded that music therapy was the most effective treatment. My question would be, did you know that already before you started your project? So did you already kind of suspect that would be the best one?
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. So what I had to do was, in order to actually work out what the best treatment was, is sort of work out what the NHS and other sort of firms use to actually work out what so the sort of criteria the NHS and other firms use to work out whether something is successful or not. So things like cost, the side effects, and other things like that. And from the beginning, without doing a lot of research, I'd say that'd be rather difficult to instantly work out. So I'll say no to that question.
Thanks for that. My next question is, if you were to restart the EPQ, so do the EPQ from scratch again, would you do it on the same topic using the exact same title, and why or why not?
Would I do the same topic with the same title? If I do the EPQ again, I'd say probably not, because I've already done my research into these subjects, so music therapy and DVS, and although there's a lot more to learn about Parkinson's, especially as 21st century research is really especially in the 21st century, Parkinson's research has really gone up a lot. I'd say I'll probably work on something else that I might be interested in, but I haven't really given it much thought.
Okay, so let's rephrase the question. Say you rewind back a year and you are just beginning to do the EPQ. Having had the experience of doing the EPQ, would you do the same topic and title?
What is the same topic and title? Yeah, I would. I don't really think there's anything I would change since doing the EPQ. No.
Okay, and my final question to you is, how appropriate do you think is the amount of investment and funding the NHS is allocating to Parkinson's? So do you think it's an appropriate amount, or would you change it if you were in charge of the budget?
Towards Parkinson's part of funding, I'm not really sure the exact value the NHS spends towards Parkinson's. Especially, I mean, this would be quite a difficult number to figure out, especially considering that there's lots of different surgeries. There's also lots of different drugs, and you have to sort of piece those numbers together. But as Parkinson's is a disease that affects the elderly, and we have an aging population in the UK, I feel like it's a disease that's going to be a lot more common. So I do feel like funding it would be a good idea to increase funding towards Parkinson's, especially as the research section is booming. You know, there's been stuff on the news recently about using dogs to sniff out Parkinson's and things like that. So there's lots of exciting stuff.
And that's the end of my questions. Thanks for that presentation, Koushikk, and you're free to go.
Thanks.